Hello, magical experimenters. Tonight I thought I would talk about how near death experiences can shape you spiritually. And you might wonder, Taylor, why did you decide to come up with this topic tonight? And the reason why is because recently I was doing a podcast interview. Imagine that, me actually getting interviewed on a podcast. It's been a long time since someone's wanted to do that, but someone finally did again. And so one of the questions he ended up asking me was about near-death experiences and how near-death experiences can shape you spiritually, like whether or not there's an actual spiritual breakthrough as a result of having a near-death experience. And I thought it was an interesting question. And at first I was a little flippant about it because you have to keep in mind that I've had about 6 or 7 near-death experiences in my life. So I I was initially flippant, but then I really thought about the question. I'm like, well, wait a minute, because initially my response is, well, you have a near-death experience, and right after you have that near-death experience, sure, you feel really alive. The food tastes better, the air you breathe tastes different, the sex you have is different. Everything is sharper and brighter after a near-death experience. But I began to think about it. I'm like, well, wait a minute, there actually is some truth to the fact that having a near-death experience can have an impact on you spiritually. Now, before I go any further with this, I'm going to say this one very strong caveat. Do not go out and intentionally try to give yourself a near-death experience, because A, if you do, I am not liable for you being stupid enough to do it because you watched this video, and B, these experiences are not laughing matters. I mean, this is not something where you want to take a risk. I, in a couple cases, took some risks, and in most of the other cases where I had a near-death experience, I did not take a risk. I had it happen to me, and I just was fortunate enough that I'm still alive. But do not intentionally go out of your way to do this, okay? If you do that, it is on you. Okay? I want to be that very 100% clear. I'm sharing this because the question was interesting and because it's relevant to the next video I'm going to do in terms of how you recover your energy and how you restore, or how you can set up extra stores of energy, because some of the experiences that I had did shape me, and not always for the positive. Nonetheless, I mean, some of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing tonight is stuff that I generally do not talk about and have not written about in my books. It is stuff I've only shared with a few people, and so you guys are getting lucky in a way, because I'm sharing publicly for the first time some stuff that I have never shared before in my life in regards to my spiritual path. So let's go back in time to when I was 7 years old, because that's when I had my first near-death experience. And that by far was the most pivotal near-death experience that I had. When I was 7 years old, my family and I were on the beach, and we were there with another family. This was in the Atlantic, and I was out on an inner tube, and this one of the older kids, who didn't really like me, basically flipped the inner tube on me and kept me underwater and basically drowned me when I was 7 years old. So I was drowned, and then I mean, it's an experience that I don't fully remember. I just remember I remember losing consciousness, and what I remember about it more so than anything else is that I ended up meeting a spirit when I was 7 years old, and this spirit came to me and basically said, "I can keep you alive, but I want something in return." And 7-year-old me wanted to live, and said sure. And the next thing I remember is regaining consciousness on the beach, and my family being furious, the other kids' family being furious, and things like that. And we never vacationed with them again after that particular experience. For me, however, what really transformed or changed was that that spirit essentially ended up melding with me and becoming part of me. And again, this is something I have never shared publicly before. I've only shared it with a few people in my life. And yet, that is something that has transformed my life significantly. Now, one of the other things that happened as a result of that experience is that I can't remember anything for the most part about the 6 years of my life before that, the 6 or 7 years. Like, I have almost no memory of that time. The only memories I have is a dream, a dream memory of sorts of my mom and dad fighting over me when I was 1 year old in an airport, which did actually happen. And I have some very repressed memories about being molested as a baby as well, which I figured out, a few years ago. But I'm not going to go into that because that's really not ground I really want to cover. In any case, at 7 years old, this happened, and shortly after that, I think that's when my interest in spiritual stuff really began to bloom. It's when I would say I had my initial tentative experiences with magic. I didn't really start to practice magic until I was 16, but I remember doing some prayers and things like that and having things happen, and it happened after that time. And it changed my life. I mean, ever since then, what I would say about it is that it's an experience that the resultant experience of it is that I have always had an uncanny amount of skill and depth with magical practice, more so than one would expect, especially in my earlier years. I mean, you get to the point where you've practiced for a while, you might expect some of the stuff, but that I think came about because of that spirit, and that spirit is still definitely a part of me, and it has given me some amazing gifts, but there's also, as I said, there's a price for those gifts. In my case, I can't remember the first 7 years of my life, and beyond that, then I had a few other experiences over the years. Now, the next time that I had a near-death experience was when I was 18, and I shared that recently in a video where I talked about how I was with this person at the time, and her best friend was going to be going through surgery, and he had a cancerous tumor or something, and it was along the spine, and if they didn't do it just right, he would have been paralyzed for life. And I ended up making a pact with the elemental spirits and did a magical working, and ended up feeling really, coming away from that just being utterly wiped out. And it was an experience that I think really brought me close to the edge of my mortality, because it was drawing upon my spiritual essence in order to accomplish the thing that happened. And again, I don't recommend doing stuff like that because it can be dangerous. You really need to be careful and know what you're doing with your work. And what that experience did, and some subsequent near-death experiences did, is it kind of ended up damaging me in some ways spiritually. Like, I eventually, years later, was able to undo that damage and fix stuff and everything, but there was a period of time where I could get very weak very easily. And because of the rarefied nature of my being, i.e. co-hosting this body with a spirit, I think that didn't help either, because it's kind of a different situation. I'm going to talk about a couple other experiences. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there were, I'll talk about three more of them. I'm not going to talk about the rest of the stuff. I mean, that's just, there's some things I don't really want to revisit. But one of the other near-death experiences I had was in my early 20s, and that was when I was driving down to take my GREs, and the road was icy, and there was this big, 18-wheeler, truck in front of me. I was driving pretty slow. I was driving carefully, but because the road was icy, there was suddenly a need to brake. I braked, and then the person that was right behind me didn't brake in time, hit my car, and what ended up happening is the car basically slammed into the 18-wheeler and then spun out into the other lane and got hit by another car, and then I went down a ditch. I consider that a near-death experience because I could have died. I mean, basically, I got hit from behind, then I ran into the 18-wheeler, and then I got spun out and hit another car and went over the side of a ditch. I mean, I had my seatbelt on. I would have died otherwise for sure. That experience really shook me up. I definitely think it contributed to some injuries that I had already had as well. And I remember that night, I ended up being driven back to State College. That's where I was at the time, and ended up having my first experience with drugs, with entheogens. It's pot and mushrooms to try and basically to get over the shock of that experience. And in some ways it helped, and in some ways it didn't, because it really left me muddy, and like it kind of helped clear out the shock, but it kind of didn't. And that ended up leading to an experience where I met somebody who said he could help me and heal me. This was a person who practiced some shamanism. And it turned out that he really wasn't interested in helping me at all. He was more or less interested in using me spiritually for his own benefit. And so he basically ended up raping me. And a few different times. Because what happens when someone is doing something with you and they're doing it for false reasons and stuff like that, and when the final time happened, he actually got me, he drugged me basically. He gave me this particular thing that and when I said, like, what are you doing to me, and told him to stop, he didn't. And that rape also ended up leading to my next near-death experience, where I basically, like, he drove me to my home that night, and I was so out of it that I could not, like, did not have control over my body. I barely made it down the stairs without breaking my neck. And it was just it was like I ended up, just like everything ended up coming out of me. And I remembered feeling my body deconstruct and like come apart, and then I had to put it back together. It taught me a lot about my body. I mean, it was a very transformative experience, but it was also a very traumatic experience because of what was happening with that person and what happened with me. And I honestly wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been able to figure out how to put my body back together. I mean, fortunately, even with some of my body issues, I still was feeling relatively connected to my body in some ways, and so that worked out. Why am I sharing all this with you? One, because I want to make it very clear, as I said at the very beginning of the video, don't be stupid and try and go and have a near-death experience, okay? Like, if it happens to you and you come out of it alive, then be grateful. And if it transforms you spiritually or not, well, don't even focus on that. It's not, the spiritual transformations that happened didn't entirely happen by choice, They happened. And yes, they transformed my life. And am I better off for it in some ways? Sure. But it doesn't change the fact that I have scars from it that I carry with me to this day, that I have experiences that have shaped my life in ways that I would rather have not ever had happen. I'm sharing like this stuff with you publicly. You know, it's not like, I mean, I've talked about the rape stuff before, but I haven't talked about some like the near death stuff as much, and certainly not about the spirit. Um, or the fact that, like I said, like I was being used by this person basically because I think he could tell that I had something going on and he wanted to connect with that spirit and use it for his own purposes and his own agenda. Which is just one of the reasons why I'm not very inclined to trust most people in general. You know, that kind of stuff, especially like with spiritual stuff. Because I have had people try to use me before, and I don't react kindly to it at this point. I fortunately have some good filters in place and some good people in place to protect me because of stuff that has happened. And then I'm going to talk about one other near-death experience. This one was an intentional one. I actually chose to do it, and I did it as a death rebirth ritual. And I did this. I wrote about it in my book Space Time Magic, not Space Time Magic Foundations, the actual Space Time Magic book. And in that state, what I did is I basically physiologically induced a state of near death in my body. I took all the different states of experience that I had had when I had experienced near death before, and over the course of 3 days basically put myself into a state of near death as a way to do a transformative ritual to rebirth myself. Why did I do it? I was in my mid-20s and I was self-destructive as I was just crazily self-destructive still. You can't come out of some of the experiences that I had and not be self-destructive, to just be brutally honest here. Because those kinds of experiences do transform you in ways that you just can't anticipate. But I came out of it and it transformed, and it was transformative. It helped me. I think it steered me toward the dream that I ended up happening, where I had kind of this dream in 2004 where it was like, if I keep going down the path I'm going down, I'm going to end up destroying my life. I had basically been pursuing the path of poison to the point that it was not really good for me at all. And I was able to make some changes accordingly and get my life on the best path. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here today, quite honestly. So can near-death experiences transform you spiritually? Yes, they can transform you spiritually. They can transform you in ways that you wouldn't expect, such as having a spirit be in your body with you for the rest of your life. And I have access to that spirit's knowledge. I have access to, I mean, honestly, if you consider the fact all the different things that I've come up with magically, you don't think I just did that on my own, did you? Maybe you did. I am a bit of a genius, but that genius, it does come in part from the spirit connection I have and from the access to the information that spirit has. And yeah, if I sound a little arrogant saying that, look, I'm pretty humble overall, but you recognize your genius where you have it. I know magic in a way most other people don't. And that's just true. It is what it is. So it does transform you. You just have to ask yourself if it's worth the price. And as I'm going to share next time, there were things that I had to do to rebuild myself energetically after some of these things happened. There were things that I had to do to rebuild myself that were not easy things to do, but nonetheless were things that needed to happen. This kind of stuff transforms your life in ways that, and even just a regular near-death experience can transform your life, okay? You can have a near-death experience and not have anything spiritually happen to you, and you will still come away with an awareness of your mortality and everything else in a way that you would never expect. I mean, I live every day to the fullest because of those near-death experiences. That alone was transformative, because the fact of the matter is, I know what it's like to be on the verge of death. that kind of thing transforms you and changes you. All right, that's it for this rather interesting topic tonight. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all stay safe and take care.